Okay. It should say on the top of your screen that I am recording it.
No, I've lost everything except the PowerPoint, which is fine on one level, but I don't quite know how I've done that. Interesting. Don't know. We'll not worry about that technology. Nick, you can be in charge of technology. So I think possibly the best way is if people have got questions, if maybe they can put them in the chat. Can you monitor those, Nick? Would that be all right?
Yep,
and then either at intervals or at the end. I think that's just easier when it's on video and you can't see who's asking for, questions or whatever. So the plan really is to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to for the last few years. Anyone who knows me knows I tend to have projects on the go, and currently the winter work, the hibernation sites, has become sort of quite a focus because we just don't know very much. So must be about 5, possibly 6 seasons ago, I was sort of been doing hibernation survey elsewhere, and when you start thinking, well, what do we actually know in Northumberland? Turns out very little. I asked Eric, the Environmental Records Centre, and the back group if they actually had any hibernation records, or did a data search to see what they could actually pull up, and this was done in summer of 2015. I discounted all the back care records, which is something I will talk about a bit later, which is mainly the odd bat turning up on somebody's lawn, being brought in by a cat. But that actually left me with 5 sites, which, when you think about the size of Northumberland, and to be fair, the age of our back group, that's pretty shocking, really. I thought we should know, a lot more than we seem to. So breaking them down, we knew we'd got a church, a hall, a culvert and a coal mine in Northumberland, and one of the other records that came back was for a hall in Durham. So really not much, and you can see that's sort of where they were. They were the sites we knew sort of pre-2015. So when you look at the size of Northumberland, never mind Durham and Cumbria as well, we really don't know very much. So what next, really? For a start, we followed up the existing records, sort of, checking them out, seeing if we'd still got access, seeing if the bats were still there. So this church, this is one of our oldest known hibernacular based on the records from the back group. It had been known as a hibernacular since 2002 and had been looked at sporadically, but certainly not in any sort of structured form for a long time. The hall was only found in 2009, but has been monitored right through since 2011, so we've got a good data set for that one. The culvert was really recent. I don't know if Sam's here tonight, but that was her fault. She shoved me into that culvert. She said, I found a really great culvert, go and have a look, and it involved quite a lot of scrambling and quite a lot of getting wet, so she stood and waited while I found the long-eareds, bless her. But we found it, and we still monitor that one. The coal mine, there was only one record right back to 2003. That's one we can't access at the moment. We have no access to go into that. And also with it being a coal mine, you've got sort of bad air and gas issues as well. So it's not really one that we want to be taking on anyway. And then the other hall was found in 2003, and we'd last checked it in 2007. So we knew the sites we were dealing with. And luckily for this one, because of this project, we managed to re-establish access into the hall. So of these 5 existing sites, we quickly found out 4 of them are actually still used by hibernating bats. So that was really good. We actually started with four sites that were known. We knew how old the records were. The 5th site, as I say, we've got no access, so we don't actually know what is going on there. Frustrating, but at least it's a record we have. We know where the site is. So we've got 4 sites effectively across the 2 counties. I mean, there will be more. Where do our bats go? If we don't actually know where the hibernacular are, we can't do anything about protecting them or monitoring them, or even just seeing, it's like monitoring, how do the numbers change year on year or through a winter? We just need the data to start with. So it's like, well, okay, if we don't know where they are, we need to do something about this. So we started looking. So to start with, there was sort of a few of us decided to go on targeted days out. We tended to do these between November and March, mainly because that's when we had more time, and also we're looking for bats in winter. But in terms of a site being counted as a hibernaculum, I've only included the figures in this if the bats were present between December and February. October, November, you could have transient bats moving from summer roosts to cool roosts and then into hibernacular, or bats using sites for mating or for swarming. And then again in March, you've got bats waking up. They could be hibernacular, but if we haven't seen them there between December and February, for the purposes of this, I've not included them. But I think it's true to say that some of the sites we've only seen in November or March. If we were to go back, we could probably add additional sites to this list. But again, there are only so many hours in a day. So first of all, we started looking in obvious places. You know, it's like bats, they hibernate, they need to be cold, they need to be dark, they need to be damp. This looks like a fairly obvious place. And yes, we did find a bat in here, which was really good. We looked in a lot of other obvious places, and a lot of the time we didn't find anything. So while the data I'm presenting reflects what we did find, it really doesn't reflect the amount of sites we've looked at that as yet we haven't found a bat in. Doesn't mean they're not going to be used, but we haven't got the data yet. But after we'd sort of exhausted a lot of the obvious places, we started looking in daft places. This video was taken by Helen. Hopefully it'll work. So that bat was actually reported to Steve, and we managed to get to the site 6 days later, and it was still there, hanging completely in the open, exposed, not tucked up against anything. We haven't been back since, but you do really wonder, and that was a December record. So it does suggest that bat's at least in torpor, if not full hibernation. And that is a pretty daft site. So when we find our sites, for a start, because if we're going into known hibernacular, we need to have people who have got the licenses to allow them to do that. Within the group of us that's been going out, there's quite a few license holders now, which is really good because we can split teams, we can split, team leader duties as well, which is really nice. And this is probably where my OCD starts to come out. But once we've found a site, they're searched systematically. We've got permission. We don't actually want to miss anything while we're there. This is a site of, shall we say, a survey in action, helped by the church warden, who is lovely and is so proud of the bats in this particular church. Just using a torch in combination with binoculars just makes such a difference. And then once we've found a bat, identify it to species or species group, depending on what it is. That's something I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we record the height of the bat, the distance from the entrance, the distance back if it's in sort of a recessed feature. We'll take a photograph, not so much of the bat, but of the exact place where it's hibernating or where it's roosting. We take a temperature near the bat, and then things like site records, including, say, altitude. Something we're starting to look at now is maybe distance to water, distance to woodland edge, or other features that maybe might give us some clues as to where to look for further sites. So we are now starting to build up a really detailed knowledge of these sites. This is just an example of what have come to be known as my photo guides. So you can see there we've got 6 crevices on the west side, and these are crevices that over, I think this one's probably 3 to 4 winters now, we're getting bats turning up in the same crevices regularly. Whether they're the same individuals, I don't know, but this gives us the ability to go back and check and know we're checking in exactly the same place. So as I say, we've been out a lot. What's really interesting is we're finding bats in a wide range of sites, as I say, from what we think sensible to what really doesn't look like a good idea at all. So far, and this probably needs to be to the tune of, 12 days of Christmas. So we have 13 adits, which these are the entrances into lead mines. I'll talk about these more in a bit because these have become a project in their own right, but these are all known hibernacular. So we now have 9 churches we've proven we've got bats in through December to February. We've got 3 halls, we've got 3 castles, we've got 5 lime kilns. I'm sure that's an under-surveyed resource. 4 culverts, which vary from this one, which is pretty much crawling, to some which you can just wander in. 4 tunnels, and then 3 barns, a bridge, a rock overhang, and a rock cut grotto. So as you can see, bats are using a wide range of sites, and I think we need to adapt what we're looking for. We're not just looking deep, dark, underground. Northumberland doesn't have caves. The geology we have, it doesn't work like that. So again, just as a bit of a recap of this section, so we had 5 original sites. We've now found 43 new sites over effectively 5 seasons, because this year, because of COVID, like so many other things, we're not undertaking our surveys this year. So we're neither monitoring our known sites or looking for new sites, because we don't want to put the bats at risk. So we'd actually have currently 47 known hibernacula, predominantly within Northumberland, but again, we've strayed slightly into Cumbria and slightly into Durham while we've been looking. And the 5th site, the 5th original site, we have got permission to do some acoustic monitoring now. We can't go underground, but I think this has still got a high potential to be used. So it's possible we actually know of 48 hibernacula, which is just brilliant. But there will be more out there. This is not exhaustive by any means. The map looks better. You can see where we've been. You can see where we've been regularly, but there's still huge chunks of Northumberland that we've either not explored or we don't have data for yet. So, I mean, there's a lot still to be looked at. All help greatly appreciated, but unfortunately, this winter is not the time. We can't actually go out and do anything. So in terms of the species, we're actually finding 6 species or species groups. Some bats, when you see them in hibernacula, you can't actually get them down to an exact species, things like whiskered and brants, and also the pipistrelles. Sometimes you can see a pipistrelle well enough to know if it's soprano or common, but a lot of the time it's just recorded as pipistrelle. But in terms of the species, we'll have a little bit of audience participation here. I'm not quite sure how that works, whether you want to stick in the chat what you think they are, but these are representative photos. Actually, that's probably unfair. These are good photos of bats we found in holes or in crevices. Sometimes you see much less of the bat than on these photos, but it's just a bit of a gentle quiz. So this used to be our most found species, but that has changed, partly because I think we found more sites which are not as suitable for this species of bats, but also within our suite of sites, these are not recorded so much, and I don't currently have a reason for that or an explanation. So we have these little darlings. These are also in our sort of suite of sites, and these are now the most commonly recorded bat. So again, a bit of a quiz, just have a think and see if you can work out what they are. These are probably our least found bats in hibernacula. And I appreciate there's no scale on any of these photos, so that's not really helping. We do find these, but rarely. In terms of numbers, these are potentially our most numerous, but not in terms of sites. And everybody should know this one, although if you've not seen them hibernating before, they do look strange because they tuck their ears away. Can I use the pointer? Yes. So that's actually the ear folded and tucked away behind a forearm. Right, so to put you out of your misery, so the 6 species, we find the 3 myotis or myotis groups. So we've got Natterer's bat, really bright white fur on the underside. You often don't get good views, but really bright white fur, relatively long ears for a myotis species. They're one of the easier ones to identify. This is a Daubenton's. These can be quite tricky. They're smaller. Well, they're a chunky bat. Shorter ears, darker ears, should have a pink nose, but often you can't see that bit. And they're paler underneath, but nowhere near as pale as the Natterers. And then this, it's a whiskered or brants. I wouldn't like to say which. And obviously, we're not handling them. We're not going any closer. So that could be either, but there you can see scruffier fur, dark skin, dark membranes, and long ears, and they do have quite a long snout, but you can't see that at all in that photo. But generally the view you get is not quite as good as that. So we have the two pipistrelles. This, I would love to know if this is the same bat. We have a particular crevice in an exposed section of wall, and most winters we have a single common pipistrelle in exactly this location. This one I think you can see well enough to be happy it's a common pip. So they've got sort of shorter, rounder ears, short, blunt noses. The fur, it's a similar colour to top and bottom, top and belly. Slightly paler, but not really noticeably. And then the last one, as I've already mentioned, this is our brown long-eared bat. These quite often will hang openly. If there's one in a daft place, it does seem to be a long-eared. Now that's not scientific and I don't have the data to prove that, but they do seem to be more willing to hang freely and not always somewhere sensible. We have one site that is a concrete tunnel, and not every winter, but several winters now, we'll have a single long-eared just hanging completely exposed in a long featureless concrete tunnel. So we are finding pretty much the entire range of species we have up here. We're not looking at trees, we're not likely to find noctule. Enthusiast pip, they could well be tucked in with the pipistrelles. There's been the odd one where you think that looks pale underneath, but no, you know, these are exceptional photos. Quite often we're looking with binoculars and a torch, you can't get a photograph of them. I'm not convinced we've found any, but I can't say we haven't. So we are finding everything we would expect to be here. But what is interesting, there are exceptions to this, but generally the pips and then the Myotis plicotus, which is the Myotis and then the long-eared bats, they're generally found in different sites, and except for possibly two sites, if they're in the same site, they're using different features within that site. But also we do need to remember we're in the northeast. None of this going in a mine and counting, you know, 223 horseshoes. Up here, finding any bat makes it a really good day out. We've had days out where we found nothing. So, you know, it's low numbers, but we're finding sites. And once we know about the sites, we can monitor them. So of the sites we have, 23 of them are now registered with the National Bat Monitoring Programme, which is run by the Bat Conservation Trust. So this means that they're counted every winter again, except this year in January and February, and that data is submitted into the National Monitoring Scheme. So that's actually being used, you know, on a national level to get an idea of trends of bats, distribution of sites where species are. So I think it's really important that we're able to contribute to data at that level. And what's really nice is 4 of the original 5 sites are actually part of the NBMP now. So we've got data for those going back a long way, whereas most of the sites now are recent discoveries. So just a couple of short case studies. This is one of the original sites. Many years ago, back in 2003, I was asked by the then site warden, did I want to look in the building? Well, that's a daft question. And it just happened to be February, and we saw bats in hibernation. At the time, I probably didn't treat that with the excitement I should have done, but we got permission and we surveyed it formally with permission in 2006 and 2007. So on those 3 years, bats were present on each of the surveys. And then through various reasons, we actually lost access. But because of this, we got permission again. You know, we sort of put a good case forward and we got in again from 2016. So we've been monitoring it from January 16 onwards. But what was interesting is we didn't find another bat until 2018. And it was exactly the date we last seen one in 2007. So it really is a case of patience pays off. It's not one of our more salubrious sites, but the bats don't care. They're quite happy. But what, again, is really interesting with this particular site is we've never seen more than 4 bats. Quite often we find 1, but over the period of the survey, so in 3, 6, 7, and again 18 and 19, we've actually found all 6 species groups. So I think it shows that while these buildings are not used by large numbers of bats, they're used by a wide range of species and therefore are really significant sites. So another site, so that the site I've just talked about, that's Urban Edge. Quite an interesting site for a lot of reasons. This one, completely different. Upland, exposed moorland. It's on a hill, not a tree anywhere near it. This was a site we just found by looking. First time we went in, woohoo, 2 bats, fantastic. 2 winters where we didn't find any bats at all. We've never found more than 3 bats, but we have found 3 species, but we've never had one of each species at the same time. So this is used by Myotis and Placotus. So it is, again, really low numbers, but used by different species. I'm going to talk a bit more now about the lead mines. In a different winter, we would actually be going out and looking at these. I'm sure some of you here tonight have come and helped me on these, well, and on the days out looking for bats as well. But over the years, we started these. 2014 was sort of the exploratory year before I got really interested in hibernation. So then 15, 16 onwards, these have been run as bat group events. And it's been fantastic to have so much support and so much help from everyone. It's been really, really good. I couldn't do it without you. Hopefully you all enjoy it as much as I do. And in an ideal winter, we would be doing this again. There are some blog write-ups on the Northumberland Bat Group website for those of you who haven't been and want to see what we get up to. But this is really just sort of a short overview of what's become a big winter project. So we're using, so when you talk about mines, we're not climbing, we're not going down ropes, we're not doing anything exciting or scary or that requires much skill. We're going in via the horse levels. These are pretty much level tunnels. Some of them you crouch, some of them are 6, 7 feet tall. They're absolutely fantastic. The majority of them are built like this. It's called arching. It's very small stones, sort of dry stone walling technique. There could be bats in so many of these crevices. We do look, we search. I'm sure we're finding a really small proportion of what's in there. And there are places where there's a couple of stones out and you can see that behind the arching, you can see there's another level. There could be, so really once a bat's in and gone round a corner, who knows? We have permission to go into these and they are all gated. So in terms of insurance, the idea is once you've gone through the gate, you've chosen to go into there. But there is a fantastic setting where they are. As I say, probably 90% of the sections we check are arched. Some of them go into smaller shale cut sections and some of them go into rock cut. There's very few rock cut in the sections that we look in. They all have water underfoot. Most of them are ankle deep, probably shin deep on a bad day. Some of them require waders. So we've got to know our sites over the time. And it is just quite phenomenal how varied they are when you get underground. Again, these are exposed sites. They're not the sort of places where you think of bats hanging around, feeding, foraging. You know, they're obviously going up there for this reason. Anyone who's been out on these surveys with me knows I have an uncanny ability to make it snow. It's become a standing joke now that in October I pick dates and I decide when it's going to snow in all of the months leading through to March. So this is not atypical weather on a day we're out. This was slightly more exciting. This ad, it's over 6 feet tall. It's absolutely packed with blown snow. But it had taken us probably the best part of an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes to walk up to it. It normally takes about an hour. And once we got there, there was no way we were giving up. So we dug a little tunnel in, had a look, found 5 bats, which was phenomenal, and then had to climb our way out again. So hopefully people enjoy these as well as actually recording the bats. So again, you know where this is going. Systematically, these are searched thoroughly, carefully, not hugely slowly because we don't want to be disturbing the bats, but we're just going along checking the crevices from different angles with a torch, We don't use endoscopes because we don't want to cause undue, we are causing disturbance by being there, but using an endoscope would mean you're in one place for too long and you're poking around and you don't know, I just think that's a step too far. So we tend to work in pairs, 4 people, possibly a maximum of 6 in an adit, but all spread out, so we're not all together at any one time. And again, we're working through, and also some of the adits, we've undertaken a fair bit of acoustic monitoring now. We started off with expresses, but more recently we've moved on to audio moths. So there's a lot of data. Usually it just tells us there's a bat flying up and down, and you think, well, we knew that, but there's a lot of data there still to go through. This is probably familiar now. When we find a bat, we want to know exactly where it is. So we're taking the height of the bat, the height of the adit, the distance it's in, and then we're putting together what's, as I say, the photo guides. But what's really good with these is if we go in a December and we find a bat, as you can see, we've got somebody pointing. So the bat will probably be in that crevice there. So there's always somebody pointing saying it's there. But it means when we go back a month later, we can actually tell if the same bat is in the same crevice, or if the crevice is empty, or if a different species is in there. Yeah, I suppose we don't know if it's the same individual, if we know if it's the same species of bat. And over the 5 years we've been doing this, in certain adits, there are certain crevices that have bats in on a regular basis. And there's one particular crevice where there's a brick out. And if you look in one angle, which we did for 2 or 3 years, you would sometimes find a Daubenton's. And then one year when the Dorby wasn't there, we realised if we stepped the other side and looked that way, there was a cavity above, and on that occasion it had a brown long-eared in it. What we don't know is whether the long-eared had been there previously, because we hadn't realised there was a cavity, but both species have been recorded in that gap since, but never at the same time. But by having this data all written down, we really are getting a feel for how these are used. And again, with bats, it always leads on to, so why are they doing it? What's going on? So we've started actually taking more, we were recording temperature when we found the bat, but now we're actually leaving eye buttons in to get an idea of the temperature between survey visits. And again, this feeds into what I was saying about the photo guide. I've picked this one because you can actually see the bat on this one, which is most unusual. So we've got the bat in the crevice here. We've tucked the eye button in. It's near to the bat, but I don't want it in the same crevice as the bat because A, obviously there would be disturbance of putting it in, and B, if the bat wakes up and scoots out and kicks my eye button into the water underneath, that's really not helping. But it also means as we've got an eye button, we've effectively marked the area where we're looking for a bat when we're going back. So it all works together. And there has been some stuff fairly recently on social media about how eye buttons give out frequencies are around sort of 45 kilohertz. These ones don't, so it must be different manufacturers. And I said I have checked these since then, but as you can see, we put them relatively close to the bats, and it's not at all unusual in certain adits especially to come back a month later and the eye button and the bat are exactly where we left them. So these ones don't seem to have that issue. And again, because we're always trying to understand, in 2 of our adits, we've actually put out eye buttons at regular intervals, effectively creating a grid from the entrance to 90 metres to try and get an idea of how the temperature fluctuates, both with distance and throughout the year with external temperatures, with the weather, with the season. So we've got a lot of data and a lot of results. So now we've actually got bats that we know are regularly, are using 13 adits and 1 culvert within this area. We have looked in more adits and we've certainly looked in more culverts, but that's currently the sites that we know of that support bats. I'm sure others do. Some sites are locked. We haven't got permission yet, or actually we now have permission, but this winter we haven't had access. They're all registered with the NBMP. We're finding all the Myotis species groups, and we're finding brown long-eared bats. Natteras used to be the most recorded bat. It's now probably Daubenton's. Brown long-eared is variable. Some winters we have a lot, some winters we don't. And they do seem to be using the remote sites more than we have a couple of sites near woodland. We don't find long-eareds there. So again, there's a lot we currently don't understand. 2 of our adits are really well used. Some of them, despite them being surveyed 3-4 seasons, some of them 3 times at least every season I've just recorded a single bat. And then there's those in between. Sometimes I'll have 1 or 2, sometimes I'll have nothing. So, you know, we're getting this picture, but we're not really understanding it yet. So are they adits? Is the bat use affected by the size of the underground system? Some of the adits we access are fallen in terms of human access. One's fallen at probably about 35, 38 metres. That often has bats in it. We have another one's fallen. I have been to the end with some cavers, or to where we can easily get to as humans. It's fallen at about 480. That often has bats in it. And then we have others that we know from talking to the mine explorers, or even going on to various websites. They can go in one system and come out, you know, 13, 14 kilometres away, having been underground for 10, 12 hours. You know, they're very, very variable. Some are well used by mine explorers. Some, I think we're the only people to go in. So does that have a factor? I'd like to say it did, but it's never that simple with bats. And we do find bats in some of them well-used systems, as well as the less disturbed ones. And the temperature data. The 2 adits that we put the grids out in are the ones that are most used by the bats, and that tells quite an interesting story as well. So this is our more lowland of the 2. So this is the adit entrance. You can see there's quite a lot of variation, but even up here, you know, in the uplands, it's only really just getting down to sort of -2 earlier in the year. By the time you get into 40 metres, it's pretty much smoothed out. It's sitting anywhere between sort of really 6 1/4, 6 3/4, and it's relatively stable. By the time you get to 90 metres, there's not really much fluctuation at all. Bats do use this adit. We found bats anywhere from about 2 metres in this one up to, it's going to be about 75, 80 metres. We've not found them beyond 90. I'm not saying they're not there, but we've not found them. This is the other one we've done temperature monitoring on. This is higher up the hill, greater altitude. This is, yeah, the highest one we check. So it's a lot more variation at the entrance, which in some ways you'd expect. It's more exposed. It's just up on the top of the hill on its own. But interestingly, at 40 metres, you're still getting this huge temperature fluctuation. I mean, it's dropping down to 2 degrees here, but it's going up to 5.5. So, you know, this hasn't got the stability of the other adit. And this one, even when you get into 90, you can still see this is obviously a refined variant of the previous one. You see, you've got the same pattern with this big drop here in February. So it is, even though to us the adits look very similar, they have very different properties. And I'm sure that is a big part in why the bats are or probably aren't using them. And the culvert, we check this culvert and we check this culvert and we check this culvert. And then last winter, suddenly it's developed brown long-eareds, quite often too. It's like, you know, what's happening, what's changing? We are recording more bats, but does this mean that there's more bats using the adits, or are we getting better at finding the bats that are using the adits? And that's not a question I currently have the answer for. Now to move on to our different group, so pips. We don't know a lot about pipistrelles in hibernation. There's 2 tucked in here if you haven't worked that out, sort of head, ears and the wrist. This wrist belongs to this bat, and then this wrist here belongs to this bat. These are actually tucked in between 2 stones, which I think is more unusual. So pipistrelles. We really know very little about where pips go, and when you search the literature, there's very little on pipistrelle hibernacula. We know a lot about horseshoes. We know a lot about bats that use mines. Less is known about things like Becksteins, noctules, because they are thought to be, or at least understood to be, tree roosting even through winter. Pipistrelles, the data just isn't there. They're not generally underground. I'm going to say generally because pips don't read the books. But if they're not in these classic sites, where are they? We found a few. This one's really interesting. This is a recent find, probably 4 years ago now. It's lime kiln. We actually look at it throughout the year, and throughout the calendar year, all 6 species groups are present. Myotis plicotus, you can find them pretty much in any month between April and October. In winter, all you find is pipistrelles. They're there through the summer, but they stay into the winter. And the maximum count of pipistrelles in winter has been 6, which isn't a lot, but it is 6 more than we started with. And there's always one. One winter we found a single long-eared in February. Don't know what that's doing there. Probably just shows that as yet we haven't got enough data to understand what they're doing. What is interesting is our old records. The church record, this is for pipistrelles, so this has been known a long time. The maximum count is 50, which makes you think really, doesn't it? That's a lot of bats. Castle, so it was a known summer roost. The wintering roost was only picked up recently, 47 maximum. Because again, these numbers change. The numbers build up, they fall away throughout the winter. Bats move. And the Hall, again, the early, more recent find, has been monitored for quite a while now, and the maximum here has been 67. I think this is something we really need to think about, because these are registered as national bat monitoring sites. I've been in touch with BCT, and these 3 are the biggest known pipistrelle hibernation routes in the country. That really makes you think. There's a castle in the Borders that has sort of high 30s, low 40s, and there's nothing else known. It doesn't mean they don't exist. We just need to find them. Because if you look at that, that's what, 170 bats? It's a lot of bats. But when you think about the size of a pipistrelle maternity roost, we're missing a lot of bats in winter. You know, we're missing a lot of myotis, we're missing a lot of long-eareds, but I think we're missing even more pipistrelles. They are occasionally found during winter. I mean, typically, because I was writing this talk, Thursday last week, I was sent this by a birder, actually. He sent me this and he went, I found these. Are they? What are they? And I was like, well, they're pipistrelles. Where are they? And this photo was taken last week. It's in a wooden shed. These bats are, he's inside the shed, looking through the window to these bats, which are behind a wooden shutter. It was taken last week. He's going to keep an eye on them for me. It seems likely that they're actually planning on spending winter there. So they're in a wooden shed. For bat care already this year, I've had a call out fairly local to me. It was in November, not into December, but the couple who lived there decided to take their wooden bird box down to clean it out. As they unscrewed it off the wall, 2 pipistrelles fell out from behind it, not in the box, behind it. So I think pips are going in places where we're not able to see them or able to look for them. And you remember I mentioned earlier about the bat care records, how I discounted them. When you look at them, some are brought in by cats, some of them are bats found active. They're also found in window frames, they're found behind fascias, they're under slates, they're behind house signs. So I went back through my own bat care records, and I've actually had 33 pips come into care in winter since 2008 that probably suggest they were hibernating. So I really think we need to have a rethink about where we're looking for pips in winter. So I'm going to leave you on that note and just say thank you to everybody who's encouraged me, accompanied me. Hopefully you've had as much fun as I have. We've got wet, we've got dry, we've eaten cake, we've had a great time. So thank you for your help, and thank you to everyone who's granted us access for these surveys as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tina. Brilliant. Really interesting. Reminds me of the days we've been down the mines and it got quite wet.
It usually gets quite wet, yeah.
Yeah, it's a grade 1 day if only your feet get wet. It's a grade 2 day if your feet and your knees and your pants get wet. And it's a grade 3 day if you get wet up to your neck. But
we haven't managed that one yet, but certainly managed grade 1 and grade 2 quite a few times.
Definitely. If anyone's got any questions, just type them in the meeting chat box, and we can pick them up and ask them. Deathly silent.
That's good. Stunned them all into silence.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a funny year this year with the IUCN and those guidelines saying basically don't get in contact with bats, unless it's an urgent care job. But I certainly know that I've got some sites on the back burner, some lime kilns, and again looking down the adits behind my parents' house in the witherite mines, just to check and see what's there.
I think based on what we've been doing, I think if you look often enough, you will find
I am
something
licensed,
yeah, you will find something.
Mm-hmm.
There are sites that we've gone back to, as I say, that culvert particularly, it's suddenly got long-eareds, and we go in now and there's long-eareds. I don't know about this winter, but I think all these sites, if they're likely, they will be used at some point. We're only there on 1, maybe 2 days through a winter. They will move. We know they move because we put eye buttons next to them and take photos, and then they go.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one question. It said from Alistair Lockett, it might be worth taking a look at old railway bridges too. Durham Bat Group have 2 hibernation roosts that are old disused railway bridges.
We do have one that is a railway tunnel, and one is a railway bridge, but yes, there will be a lot more. Access is sometimes, or permission for the tunnels is more of an issue, but yeah, bridges is certainly something we need to look at more. I think I've just got one, and that's into Cumbria, and that's near another site rather than one I've looked at specifically.
Oh, one more question's come through. So Margaret asks, what will happen if you find some in your garden? Hence the one found behind the bird box. So we tend to take them into care, don't we?
Well, they came in as a bat care call. They were found on a Sunday. Bat care helpline doesn't operate at a weekend at the moment, so I got the call on the Monday. So I took them home, warmed them up. They put their bird box back because they were like, oh, we've destroyed a roost, we really don't want to. And it's like, well, just put it back on the wall. So they put the bird box back, warmed the bats up, fed them. It was a mild evening, so we took them straight back and actually just posted them up behind the back of the bird box. So hopefully they'll just stay there. So that roost has been retained, and they're actually welcomed. The people were really lovely. Once they realised they hadn't done anything wrong, they were actually really pleased to have their bats, which is really nice.
Oh, brilliant. Is there any relationship between temperature and species selection of hibernation location? I can say yes for the species I've surveyed abroad, where there's lots of different flavours, but I don't know what you found in Northumberland.
I don't think we've got enough data to prove it statistically, but certainly the pipistrelles are selecting different temperatures to the Myotis placotus, but I'm not sure we've got enough data. As I say, we are working in the northeast, and any bat is a good bat. I mean, some days, I think our best day in the adits we found 13 bats, but there will be people who've been with me when we found no bats at all. So it's something we need to look at, and we have got more data to look at this winter, and maybe this winter's when we actually sit down and go through it, but I think there will be.
Yeah, because for the overseas surveys that I've done, we tend to find lesser and greater horseshoes. Don't mind the temperature fluctuations so much, and they're often found in the first 5-10 meters. And then the Mediterranean horseshoe bat, Mayhay's bat, we're finding right at the back of the cave systems, where it's constantly about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. So
yeah, none of ours are that warm, but I think horseshoes probably do like more warmth. But certainly, as I mentioned earlier, long-eareds do hang openly more than any other species. So it makes you wonder if they're selecting something cooler.
Yeah,
they're actually
that one in the entrance was just crazy, blowing around in the breeze.
Yeah, it was passed on to me, and it was still there 6 days later from when it was originally found to me seeing it. What happened to it after that, I wouldn't like to say.
Okay, we've got one more question. Do you think stone barns would be viable, especially in the North Pennines?
Yes. If they've got gaps, where I have found them in barns, they're often where you've got stone and wood. They're between the two materials. So yes, I think they are viable, and we need to look at more, because in the North Pennines there are plenty of abandoned barns that, yeah, will function in the landscape, definitely.
And old farmhouses with wooden sash windows. Sometimes they
Okay.
will hibernate in the nice thick wood around the sash windows as well.
Yeah, that's the sort of place you get pipistrelles in from care over winter. Maybe not from your farmhouses, but often totally unintentionally when somebody's replacing a wooden window with a UPVC frame. With going back and looking at my records, I think I've had 12 over the years where that's happened, and they've just taken the window out. Oh, there's a bat, and it's always been pipistrelles, but it's always been in urban areas. The ones that have come into me. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, got one more. Do you think the bats hanging in silly places could be juveniles? And probably male. No, didn't say that.
Who knows? It does make you wonder. But what is interesting is because we're monitoring to crevice level, they're far more mobile than I probably expected them to be, which could suggest that they are, all our data is just a snapshot. They could be moving far more than we're giving them credit for. But yeah, it could well be youngsters not quite working it out, but then they've got to work it out pretty quickly to survive, really.
Definitely. Has anyone checked out maternity roost sites for pips as potential hibernation sites? Yes, I was in my attic yesterday and it's empty.
The 3 big pip sites that I know of are not summer roosts for pip, or not summer maternity roosts, which answers the sites I know about, but not the wider sites. I wouldn't be at all surprised, where do they go? If they're in a more modern building, they can sit behind the fascia boards. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're there. Probably less so if they're in a loft space, but if they're external to the building, yeah, it's the sort of thing I think we need to be looking at. We need to be finding them.
Any more questions? It's a real shame we can't be advertising some dates to go splodge around in head mines this winter.
Next year, hopefully we'll be back to normal. Yeah.
With the Snow Queen.
I don't know what you mean.
Every time Tina wrote me a blog and sent me photos, it was like, and the snow was 2 feet deep.
One winter we cancelled and rescheduled all 6 visits because of snow, and 3 of the rescheduled ones got cancelled and rescheduled again. I do have an uncanny ability to know when it's going to snow. It adds to the fun.
Definitely. Okay, well, if no one else has got any questions, I think just a big thank you to Tina. It's been a really fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Yep.
And for anyone that did manage to log on, and you're obviously there, our next talk is on Tuesday, the 19th of January. And it's about Northusius pipistrelle migration. If you asked to be on that talk, then I've already got you in my spreadsheet and I'll send you out an invite after Christmas. I just didn't want to send them all out together in case I got people on wrong talks on the right night. See what I mean? But if you're interested in that, just drop me an email and I'll send out all the invites in early January. So thank you very much. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Tina.
You're welcome.
See you
There's
later.
actually one more question just popped up.
Oh, go on then.
Do you think some bats just hibernate for a few days at a time, unlike on the continent?
Yes.
Yeah, they definitely
Probably.
do.
Yeah, certainly pips move. Pips move all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
That was really interesting. We must have some quite big data management going on with spreadsheets with all your survey data and everything.
Yeah, I mean, what's really, really nice is Alistair, who was here earlier, but I think he's escaped. He's been out with us 2 or 3 winters back and is now doing the same thing in Durham.
Brilliant.
So we're actually going to pool, we're currently in the process of pooling his data and my data to see if that gives us any more information, which it would be really good if it did. The plan is to get it written up for British Island bats. But that involves a bit of stats and thinking about it, which I have roped Sean in for, who has gone suspiciously quiet on the emails at the moment. But hopefully we might, with both of our data, we might have enough to do something with it, because we are just talking about a handful of bats.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is something in there. We just need to dig it out and work out what it is, really.
So I'm quite tempted to put a camera in my roost, wire it in with Wi-Fi,
That would be
and
really
see
good.
when they come and go, because they're quite accessible from the inside.
They do come into your loft, do they? They're not.
When it's really, really, really hot or really, really, really cold, they come in over the top of the wall plate. Yeah. So on a normal day, they're just on the out-facing wall, but protected by the soffit. And then extremes of temperature, they come right into the loft. Quite funny.
And that's the sort of roost. You think if they're in a soffit, they could be there now.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise
and we
me.
just can't see them. You know, it's the places that pips are turning up is where we genuinely can't check.
I know. I did all the window replacements for Your Homes Newcastle. Gosh, must have been about 10 years ago. But before it was Your Homes, it was something else then. And there were streets where you would just find 5 or 6 pips in the windowsills in December, and then you'd go for 4 or 5 more streets and not find a single thing.
Yeah, and it's like, what's the attraction of those particular
Same construction,
ones?
same everything.
Were they generally downstairs?
Mixture of both. We had a couple downstairs and a couple upstairs, but they'd be downstairs in the upper part of the frame or upstairs in the lower part of the frame.
Yeah, I mean, most of the ones, because it made me look, the ones I've had in care from window frames, I think all of them except 2 have been downstairs, and quite a few of them in front room windows where you would think they would be too warm, noisy, disturbed. Pips don't do what we expect.
No, and I've always had half a fancy that if it hadn't been for coronavirus, I'd go back to my parents' house and check out the cellar under their house, because it's had a broken window into the cellar for years.
Yeah, do it.
I'm just like, wonder. It's cool and damp down there.
And I do think the function of between wood and stone does seem to be really important. Most pip hibernacular are between wood and stone. I don't know why. They're not all, because that would be too easy, but
yeah, they don't read the guidebook.
The majority, certainly the big roosts, the big aggregations where you get a lot together, they're between wood and stone.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The reason I asked about the maternity sites for pips as potential hibernation sites, earlier this year I assisted somebody on a bit of work in a community centre. And there was I think through the summer there was about 400 sopranos in the maternity roost. So when we went and done this like the repair work, 40 hibernating sopranos dropped out.
That's a lot. That's a big roost.
Yes. So do you want me to stick it in an email? Because I thought it might come through to you.
Yeah, that would be an interesting record. So were you able to build something for them to get back in straight away?
It was through another consultant, so I'll check with her if she's okay for me to pass you the details. But we've got in contact with Natural England, and it was just put it back for now and sort it out through the between the end of maternity season and before the next hibernation season. That, like I say, that was earlier this year.
I would think that is more common than we're aware of, because we don't go poking about in those structures.
Yeah.
You can't generally see where pips, you can see where they come out when they're breeding, but you can't see where the roost is, so you can't see if they're there in winter.
In a single story flat roof, the drains had been leaking in under the felt, and it was on the it was just the plasterboard ceiling with a bit of kingspan.
Interesting.
And then ply roof, and then the felt on top. But the water there'd been a load of water ingress. So it was ideal. It was cold, damp, stable.
Interesting. I would think we're missing, we've got these big roosts which are really important, but when you add that up, that's not even a decent maternity roost. They're our commonest species or species group. We don't know where they are, so that seems highly likely that that's probably not unusual. We just don't have the data.
Yeah. And also, my mother-in-law contacted me earlier today. One of her friends has asked me to go and have a look in her house because she's found 3 dead bats on her dining room table over the last couple of days.
Has she any idea how they're turning up on the dining room table? Is there a cat involved?
No, she thinks they've got bats through the summer, but these bats have just turned up indoors on the dining room table.
I mean, it's mild. Bats probably are moving about at the minute, but that might be worth her calling BCT for the helpline.
But they want me to go and have a look, but I don't. You know, with the coronavirus, it's a bit like,
Well, that's why I think they should call BCT, because they are doing virtual roost visits rather than actually sending people out.
Right.
So it might be better if she goes through them, because they've got the procedures in place, because it is going into somebody else's house, regardless of then us going into a bat roost as well.
Yeah.
It's frustrating, but it's where we are. We don't want to be the bat workers that cause the problem.
Yeah.
So maybe get them to give BCT a ring if they would.
Yeah, I'll drop them a phone call and say, look, this is the best way.
And just see, because I mean, if they are coming in via the house, it would be good to find where they're coming in, but it is like we're needle in a haystack.
Yeah, because they might even have a hibernation roost there. We don't know now at the moment, do we?
It's possible, we just don't know where they are. But I mean, Nick's done roost visits as well, and trying to find where bats come into living spaces it's a nightmare, isn't it? Yeah.
It just reminds me of a guy I did a lot of training with, Nick Bonsall, telling me a story about they were desperately trying to find out where these bats were going in and out, and they managed to set up a heart trap, catch a load of bats, and then put some organic, non-harmful, glow-in-the-dark
excellent
dye on them, so they were able to then shine the sort of infrared light, and it made them go funky colours. And he said, you're just sort of sitting there in your deck chair wondering when they were going to go back home, and you've just got these green and yellow and blue things flying around above you.
Cool.
Oh, the whole concept just seemed hilarious.
Oh, that's pretty cool. We've not tried that one.
No, maybe it's something for the summer. Excellent. Right, I'm going to stop recording, I think. I don't know if it ends the session or not, but let's have a go.
Well, thank you very much. It was very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.